So I have the honor to be the chair of this panel with three brilliant speakers. It is first my great pleasure to announce our first speaker, Professor Chenyang from the Nanyang Technological University, in Singapore, who will be speaking about a deep harmony account of justice. So please, Chenyang, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Yana. That's a great speech. And thanks to Roger, Yana, and Maya for organizing this conference. I know have a lot of work going into it. I'm honored to be here. And also it's good to see many old friends online. So it's really making me feel kind of like a reunion of some kind. I also wanted to say a few words about the connections and the lack of connections between me and our hero, Zehou. I first got to know Zehou's name when I was an undergraduate student at Peking University in the late 70s. When Zehou had a book out called 批判哲学批判, a critique of the critical philosophy, or philosophy critique. So on Kant, the first critique. And as an undergraduate student, we were all struggling with Kant, and Zehou's book was one that we all wanted to read. Even though honestly, I cannot say I fully understood Zehou's book, but that's when he came to me as a major philosopher of the time. Then around 1980, either a year earlier or a year after, 1980, he came to my university to give a talk. So I was among the first to arrive to hear his talk. The talk is about philosophy and history. I still remember that. He said that we need to kind of integrate these two approaches, because if you only focus on history, you tend to lose yourself in the minute details. If you only embrace philosophy, you like, traveling in the open, in the air. It's kind of empty. You don't have any solid ground. So that was a very impressive talk. I still remember as one of the few talks I attended as an undergraduate student. I appreciate that. Then after coming to the US, after he got to teach at Colorado College, I was teaching at Monmouth College, as Roger would recall. And along with the 8 Midwest colleges, we were together as the consortium of the Midwest colleges. And the consortium organized many academic events. I was hoping one of those days, events either in Chicago or at Monmouth or Colorado, we will be able to meet again. But that never happened. Another opportunity to meet him was at an APA conference in the mid-90s at Philadelphia. And a group of friends, including Li Pei-min, saw his name on the APA program. So we tried to, we scheduled a dinner with him, to treat him to dinner. But for some reason, my flight was delayed, so I missed that one. And the next chance would be Roger's Philosophy East-West Conference in Hawaii. He was on a program, and then for some reason he had to go to Beijing. I missed him again. The last time was Yana's conference 2020. I wasn't sure whether he would come, but I was secretly hoping that there may be some miracle he would just show up there. Of course, the conference did not take place. And now all is over. So I regret missing so many opportunities, missing reconnecting with him. Now I will share my talk. As Yana said, my record is already uploaded. Here I will just talk the basic ideas. Do you see my shared screen? You do, okay. So this paper has 3 parts. The first part present and problematize the Zehou view that harmony is higher than justice. Part 2 is an examination of a few alternative views. For the sake of time, I will not cover part 2 today in this presentation. Then the last part, I advance a view that from the perspective of Confucian deep harmony, harmony serves both as the metaphysical foundation and as the ultimate goal of justice. Ontologically, that means deep harmony accounts for the existential context in which justice is to be established, and metaethically, justice as instituted in the form of norms and rules ultimately serves the purpose of social harmony. The harmony and justice are 2 leading values in Chinese culture and in Western culture, as we learned from John Rawls' work in the last few decades. And Zehou famously claimed that harmony is higher than justice. In his view, that harmony is higher than justice, justice clearly discriminates between right and wrong and maintain fairness and reasonability, but harmony cannot replace justice. Rather, harmony is to be achieved on the basis of justice. Hence, harmony can only channel and probably construct justice. It cannot determine or control justice. That is the whole view. And this translation from the whole, there are different translations. What remains unclear is whether the whole system can accommodate a robust concept of justice. And justice sometimes contradicts harmony. And the whole system is based mainly on harmony. To what extent he can accommodate justice is a question that the whole left, I think, unanswered. One challenge between the consistency of justice and harmony comes from Erin Klein. She argues that justice sometimes requires us to go against harmony, to disrupt harmony, and the 2 are not always reconcilable. I think Erin Klein's question is important for us, for our understanding of the relation between these 2 concepts. If justice sometimes requires us to go against the harmony, how can these 2 fundamental concepts be reconciled? That is the main question of this paper, and Zehou did not elaborate on this. I present a deep harmony account of justice in order to reconcile these 2 fundamental concepts. I agree with Zehou that harmony is higher than justice. I take this to mean that on the level of social practice, even though justice is a precondition for harmony, our ultimate goal should not end with justice. We should strive for harmony. In my view, however, harmony is higher than justice, not only in the sense that Zehou has advocated as a higher goal of human pursuit, but also harmony is higher on a conceptual level. That is to say, any current form of social justice has to be built on the concept of harmony as its ultimate grounding. In order to account for harmony and justice at both the practical and ontological levels, we need to introduce the concept of deeper harmony. Deeper harmony is a concept I proposed in my 2014 book on the Confucian philosophy of harmony, on which Yana provided a very kind and generous review. I appreciate that. Deeper harmony stands for the idea of harmony. The idea that harmony is the driving force for the formation and operation of things in the world at all levels, as many of us are familiar with. The Chinese cosmology started with a Hundun, originally chaotic Xi, with no order, no form, no rules there. Then the evolution of Hundun comes out with yin and yang and different levels of existence. I take that as a account that at every level, from the original Qi, Hundun, to the world we live in, is a process, the outcome of a process of deeper harmony. To say it's deep, it means harmony penetrates all levels of existence, from the very beginning, the fundamental level of Hundun, to the social level we are living in now. All are levels of different harmony. Now we move to justice. On the issue of justice, Michael Sandel argued that Rawls fails to understand the circumstance of justice. And Sandel argues that because there are different circumstances, the requirement for justice is also different. For example, in a family setting, justice is not such a big priority. On that regard, Zehou goes further. I think it's out of a Marxist influence. Zehou says justice is not the contract between individuals. It comes from the historical situation or context of people's collective existence. That is, our human history makes a difference on justice. It provides an account of our current justice system. Now, my view moves along these lines, started with Sandel and Zehou. It goes a step further. I argue that in a large metaphysical framework, ontologically speaking, even Sandel's circumstance of justice and Zehou's historical situation have to be further accounted for by deeper harmony. Now, this is a long passage, I will just read it. From the perspective of deep harmony, justice has to be defined in the context of the human condition and its overall environment in which human beings find themselves to be. On the deep harmony account, the present set of human condition and its overall environment is not an eternal given. Rather, it is the outcome of the prior processes of harmonization in the world. Deeper harmony. Had the prior processes of harmonization been different, our present situation would have also been different. His justice would have been different. In primitive societies, polluting the air would not be a problem. And if the Earth makeup had been evolved in different ways, and polluting the air would not be a difference. Would not be an issue. So all depends on the logical content, philosophically, what we have evolved through each level of harmonization. I think that provides a larger context. Then what is the point of appealing to the concept of deep harmony? In the direction Sandel and Zehou have worked, the perspective of deep harmony further broadens our horizon and enables us to further see why Rawls' approach falls short in figuring out what justice is. If humanity and indeed the entire world could have been different, our conception of justice would have been different. Merely thinking from a rational mind does not give us a uniform and universal scheme of justice. That is my point. The view of deep harmony may not directly affect how people pursue justice in society. It does offer a different perspective, and I have seen that philosophically, harmony is more fundamental than justice and is higher than justice on a conceptual level. Now I'll move on to my last point. Now, Klein argues the tension between justice and harmony. Indeed, we know that in everyday life, the two can come into conflict. So how to resolve that? I introduced the idea, kind of analogy of rule utilitarianism as a solution. As we know that rule utilitarianism, act utilitarianism are different. Rule utilitarianism focuses on a particular act, and the rule utilitarianism focuses on the rule, where the rule tends to produce, to maximize the ultimate outcome. So learning from that, I think justice as we instituted in society basically is like a rule in utilitarianism. Because the justice rules, social norms tend to ultimately promote harmony in the long run. And even though in particular act, it violates harmony, but the rule it goes away, that the social justice rule ultimately is justified on their contribution to the ultimate justice. And this can be found in the Chinese idea of Li. And I have argued that Li is constituted to promote harmony, and Li is a comprehensive meaning, covers social justice, rules, and the law in ancient time. This is one other example. You can read it later. So basically, in conclusion, ontologically, deep harmony accounts for the existential context in which justice is to be established. And metaethically, justice as instituted in the form of norms and rules ultimately serves the purpose of social harmony. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Li Chenyang, for your first for your memories and then for your short presentation. I have also read your paper and find it really very, very interesting and a very good contribution. Now, I think we can proceed to the second talk, and this is precisely Professor Wu Xiaoming's talk. Professor Wu Xiaoming from the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, and he will be speaking about Li Zehou's interpretation of the concept of the grasping of the proper measure, or do in Chinese. We have somehow a very similar topic, I saw. But now, without further ado, because we are 5 minutes late, I will leave the floor to you, dear Xiaoming, please.
Thank you, Yana. And thank you, Roger and Maya. Thank you for the organizing the conference and inviting me. And hello, friends and colleagues, including people I haven't seen for a long time. I will, especially Karen. Hello. I'll start from now. Yeah. If I have to give my presentation a title, it could well be the passivity of do. The do as the primary category is in Li Zehou's anthropological ontology. However, talking about Li Zehou's do in English runs a certain risk of speaking the more or less unspeakable. As Li Zehou says in an explanation of the summary chart on ethics that, quote, I hope in the coming decades and years, the Chinese terms qing and du, which are central to my philosophy, could become like the commonly used terms Dao and Yin Yang that are phonetically translated in Western languages, as none have appropriately corresponding translations in Western languages. There is a cluster of meanings around the word "du," as "du" means quite a few things in Chinese: measure, degree, limit, extent, and linear measure. Interestingly, it also means tolerance, magnanimity, and consideration. Furthermore, it forms with other characters some two-character words, among which I will only mention two: 适度 and 制度, normally translated as adaptation or suitability and institution, as the two are of particular interest for our discussion of "du." Li Zehou's conception of "du" as the primary category in his anthropological ontology gave rise to a few interesting and important questions. To name just a few, the question of "du" as ontological status, or more precisely, whether "du" is the 本体, which I prefer not to translate, because it's difficult to translate in any Western terms. Whether "du" is the 本体 in Li Zehou's 本体论 or ontology, as Li Zehou sometimes thinks. And the question of the difference between the "du" as mastered by humans and the "du" as mastered by animals. Since I have discussed in detail these and other related questions in my paper, I will concentrate this talk only on the question whether or how "du" is or can be a human creation, a human manufacture, as Li Zehou puts it. And if the answer is a yes, at least in a certain sense, then how or in what way it could be so? In my view, this question might have concentrated all the problems about "du" as Li Zehou conceives it. The kernel of Li Zehou's definition or description of "du" sounds quite simple and straightforward. "Du" is grasping proper limits and doing things just right. 度就是掌握分寸，恰到好处。Li Zehou writes, quote, "Du does not exist in any objects, nor within consciousness. It first appears in human production and living activities, which means it is in the practice and the function. It is a human creation, a human manufacture. Therefore, rather than quality or quantity, being, 有 or nothingness, it is 度 that is the primary category of anthropological ontology," unquote. This argument prompts some questions. It is first and foremost because Li Zehou affirms that animals can also master 度 as doing things just right, at least to some certain extent or 尺度. If this is true, it is hard to claim that 度 is specifically a human creation or manufacture unless we add a specific condition of human onto 度 in our argument. Despite that, let's try to ask, how could a human species 度 even be a human creation? I would roughly propose the following. If 度 means doing things just right, then 度 is merely, at least at first, an adaptation. Li Zehou argues for 度 with the aid of Chinese conceptions of 巧, skillfulness, 调, suit well, fit in perfectly, 中, central, not leaning to any side, and 和, harmony, implying that Li Zehou, in fact, also regards 度 as a mutual adaptation between the active actor and the passive actor, or between interacting actors. It is not that the one, presumably man, as the active actor, imposes their do or their own measure, 尺度, and standards onto the other. In the example of horticulture, doing things just right means that humans have to suit the do of the plant. Humans have to provide a 尺度, have to provide a 适度 or suitable living environment for the plant, and the 适度 or suitably water and fertilize the plant. They have to let the plant receive 适度 or suitable amount of air circulation and exposure of light and so forth. This conception of suitability, 适度, contains a certain passivity on the part of the active agency of the human. As cultivators and farmers, the first thing for humans is not to create a do that could be imposed on the plant. Instead, humans need to suit themselves to the do for the plant. Thus, in the human activity of cultivating the plant, it is not that I manufacture the do for the plant, but rather it is the plant that regulates or determines the do for me. The do comes from the other, the plant. The reason why the plant is able to provide the do for me and thus regulate my cultivating activities is that the plant itself is a do for my cultivating activities. Therefore, here as everywhere, it is the other that requires me to treat it in the most suitable way, or in a way that is most suitable for letting the other be what it is and how it is. Accordingly, in the cultivating activities, although I apparently seem to be the active actor, the one who imposes do, it is always the other that first requires me to suit it. The term 适度 means that I suitably adapt myself to the other's do, or to the other itself as the do for me, and that I do my best to let the other most suitably be the other. This also means my original and unconditioned respect required by the other for the other to be the other people, other matters, and other things. Just as well, this might be exactly the ethics that we need given the nature of today's modern technology, which is one of Zehou's philosophical concerns. For instance, specifically, when we began to not only welcome the revolutionary changes in human society brought by artificial intelligence, but also worry that artificial intelligence might bring about the devastating impact on humanity itself, on the very nature of being a human. Modern technology represents humanity's ever-strengthening control of the things and objects. This is the ever-expanding power of dominance that humans pursue. Nonetheless, this limitless pursuit of power has to be balanced and regulated by some sort of ethics, that is, humans suitably adapting themselves to the others do. Or, in Heidegger's words, this sort of ethics is the requirement which stems from being itself, Sein, to Dasein, or the human being. As a matter of fact, in historical ontology, while Zehou made the argument that do is a human creation, a human manufacture, he inadvertently makes a claim, inadvertently might not be the suitable word, made a claim which is not in accordance with this argument, and perhaps even contradicts it outright. For instance, Zehou quotes his early works and said that do means that in successful practical activities, the unanimous amalgamation of the subjective purposefulness and the objective regularity, whereas the subjectivity of and consciousness precisely could lack do, since it is lacking the direct limitation and regulation from the objective material need of survival. In addition, he said that the ontological nature, 本体性, the ontological nature of do as the foundation is not solely a subjective human invention, farming, but also a discovery of nature or objects. Here, in the so-called amalgamation of purposefulness and regularity in the so-called subjective consciousness has to be limited and regulated by the objective material need of survival in so-called a discovery of nature, is actually admitting to, or even emphasizing that do is do in the sense of 是do, and do as doing things just right. It's impossible to be a human creation and manufacture unless we redefine the meaning of do or the meaning of creation and manufacture. Okay, I'm realizing. Furthermore, the following description that frequently appear in historical ontology seems also to run in the opposite direction from do as a human creation and manufacture. For instance, Zehou said that do contains some sort of irregularity and unpredictability, or that it contains unpredictable possibilities and contingencies. It is also said that do is not the track, rules, or consistencies that can be framed by rationality. It is filled with uncertainties, unconventions, multi-centers, and contingencies. It is open, vacillating, ambiguous, and full of sensibility, 感受.
Yeah.
I think when I did the recording, I think I have the time, but I'm only halfway. But let me just one word I can finish. I'll leave this, for discussion. I would, even like to go as far as saying that it is Zehou's do has ontologized his ontology, although he himself constantly drew a do back into his ontological theory. My essay is only a preliminary attempt at explaining and liberating, quote unquote, the potential power of the omnipresent and exclusive do in this whole thesis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. We will have lots to talk, and I think that our contributions will be in the same section, because I'm also very much interested in do, as the process of the grasping of proper measure, and together with Roger, I also think that it is one of the very important, one of the most important concepts actually in Zehou's philosophy, and also in Chinese contemporary philosophy in general. But yeah, I will stop talking now because we will have 45 minutes for a debate left then afterwards. But now I'm very glad and honored to be able to introduce shortly our third speaker today, Jordan Martin, who is a young scholar and currently working at the Hunan University in the People's Republic of China. And he will introduce us to a paper entitled Sedimentation and Gene Culture Coevolution. So please, Jordan, the floor is yours.
I suppose I don't need to do too much self in there. Yes, I'm in Hunan, in the province where Li Zehou grew up. And this is about as close, unfortunately, as I ever came to meeting him vicariously through my doctoral supervisor, Professor Xiaoming. And so there we are. Unfortunately, I missed out on the chance of communicating with him in person, but I've read a lot of his work at the encouragement of Professor Zhou, and it's been fantastic. So I'm very honoured to be part of this commemorative conference, and thank you very much to the organisers for all their hard work. Alrighty, so the paper I'm presenting today, is Sedimentation and Gene Culture Coevolution. So just at the start, I'm like putting up in lights here, this culture influences the brain. It was a very crucial thesis for Li. He regarded it very highly. He said rather dramatically at one point that if this thesis was proven correct, then it would be more important than all of his books put together. So he obviously held this proposition in high regard, but for better or worse, it was always just the sedimentation metaphor which was propping up this thesis. A lot of the criticism of his work that I read from Chinese scholars was saying, oh, this concept is a bit of a dust bunny. It's a bit hard to like pin down exactly what it means. So I think gene culture coevolution is a model which can help us kind of flesh out some of the theoretical underpinnings of this sedimentation idea. I think most people who are participating in this conference would be fairly familiar with the sedimentation theory itself. So I'll skip over that as quick as I can, see if I can steal us a few minutes back. There's three levels. There's yuan shi jidian. So this is often translated as species sedimentation. There's cultural level sedimentation and individual level sedimentation. So at the level of yuan shi jidian, Martha Chandler in this volume, which has already just been mentioned before, would have given Professor Li, if he'd had the chance to read it, I'm not sure whether he did or not, hopefully he would have felt confident that his culture influences the brain thesis was well backed and was on track, was empirically proven. But Martha Chandler didn't dwell too much on the theoretical underpinning. So that's what I want to do today, and also bring out for cultural and historical human nature, and it's not some kind of Mencian heaven bequeathed product. It is the product of like the aggregate of our hominin ancestors' experiences is what has shaped our common human nature. But then that common human nature becomes transcendental, so to speak, doesn't he kind of flaunts the prohibition that Kant applied to the empiricization of the transcendental. In fact, Li's kind of transcendentality is very much empirical. So this is a big part of the sedimentation theory, an important part of it. And obviously also he emphasizes the importance of tool making as an experiential practice, which has shaped our common cultural psychological formation. So everyone would probably be familiar with sedimentation. What may not be so familiar to everyone is gene culture coevolution. So this is a theory that explains the interaction Donald Munro's argument, in which he argues the kind of garden variety ecology, and that he the reason that as an ideology lasting so long in these measures because it took an accommodationist approach to our natural genetic kin-selected tendencies to be partial. How does it do that? There's nothing Lamarckian here. There's nothing kind of anti-scientific. How it does it is through the dual inheritance that we have. We inherit this kind of body of cultural know-how, which, along with our genetic endowment, is part of our dual inheritance. And so you have these intergenerationally stable praxis and bodies of cultural know-how that alter the selective regime, alter the selective environment that is faced by genomes. And so due to the stable presence of these cultural praxis, we end up getting biological adaptations happening on periodicity. Is skip over some of the details of that, otherwise we'll be heading over time. But the fact that some human populations, adult individuals can digest lactose, which is the sugar in milk, is precisely because those populations have had this history and this knowledge, this cultural knowledge, obtain milk from ungulate species, and then that has driven these alleles which confer lactase persistence to fixity in precisely those populations. So this is the example that shows kind of how cultural evolution, gene culture coevolution. I want to demonstrate some of the confluences, some of the similarities between this and the sedimentation theory. But first, there's this rather paradoxical passage in Lee's response to Paul Gauguin's triple question to deny that humans come from animal gene mutation, is the way that's been translated there. Is he really denying that the operation of selection on mutational variation played no role in turning Australopithecines into modern Homo sapiens? I don't think he's saying that. If you look elsewhere in his corpus, there's plenty of textual evidence to suggest that he accepts the notion of mutation-driven evolution. But what he wants to emphasize is that human beings themselves, our hominid ancestors, played a really active role by participating in these experiential technosocial praxis. That is how the human race created herself, so to speak. And the way that it did that is by having these technosocial praxis in place, which provide the selective environment, which drives these lucky mutations and to retain those genetic mutations that would be lost. So what he's opposing is the idea that we were just that one lucky primate species that won the mutational lottery, and then a couple of silver bullet mutations drove us kind of inevitably down the path towards anatomical modernity. I think that's the kind of line that he's trying to oppose. He wants to emphasize the participatory and experiential character. And the gene culture coevolution kind of virtuous cycle dynamic where culture and biology stabilize and act upon each other shows us some of the non-Lamarckian. And so similar ideas in Darwin, in this very famous remark from his notebook M, where he says that in the Phaedo, our necessary ideas arise from the pre-existence of the soul, are not derivable from experience. Where they come from, we can read monkeys for pre-existence. So we have like the aggregate of our hominin and primate ancestors' experiences substituting in for Platonic anamnesis. I think this is a good way of understanding what Lee thought about this transcendental for the individual character of our common human nature. So next I'm going to enumeration of the evidence for sedimentation happening at the individual level. At this level, it's just ontogenetic rather than phylogenetic. So we're not having heritable changes in the germline here. These are just macroscopic changes in the brain that happen through across an individual lifespan. We engage in these cultural practices, and these kind of changes in our brain show up. So at that culture influences the brain is certainly quite obviously true. Once we get to cultural sedimentation, this is where we're starting to see, thank you, Maya, this is where we're starting to see heritable variations and heritable adaptations, and we see them in some human populations, but not in others. What a good example here is from Dediu and Ladd, where the derived haplogroups of ASPM and microcephalin, which are two brain development associated genes, they show a strong correlation with negative completely Mesoamerica. So the a culture influences the brain. You have this certain language morphology that is there stably, and this is pushing our genes in a certain direction. The same is true of 5-HTT-LPR, which is a serotonin transporter gene. It was found to be strongly correlated with the levels of collectivist and individualist values in certain populations. We can take this, I won't go into all the specific interpretive scenarios there just for time, but we can take this as being culture that's built up around a certain type of agriculture, pushing back on the genome and forcing changes across a very short amount of evolutionary time. Again, I'll have to go through this very quickly as well. This is at the level of sedimentation at the species level. The important thing that I'll just pick out here is that the significant functional and anatomical overlap of the motor control neuroinfrastructure, which is necessary for both tool manufacture and for vocalization. These things overlap and they co-evolve together. And so, yeah, this has really thoroughly been vindicated. The Marx and Engels story, which Lee followed along with. And this is a good example of sedimentation happening at the level of the species. So have I got 2 more minutes left? I think that the role of Kant in Zehou is kind of puzzling. He kind of flaunts some of Kant's prohibitions on the empiricization of the transcendental, and we kind of think, oh, what role is Kant actually playing? Because he's not talking about like the same thing as Western philosophers who are arguing about compatibilism and radical free will. I think when he says free will, what he means is he wants to give a genealogical story about the ability to override our initial responses such that our behavior, just to link this back to the previous talk, is compatible with, say, Qing or Du. This is just an adaptation, and it allows us to interact with each other better in group situations. And this relies on high levels of neocortex development. And this ability to override our initial responses, which might take us over the level of Du that we should be keeping to, this is basically the only good thing that that he could find in Mencius. I recommend everyone to read the Mencius's immense contribution chapter. It's very entertaining. He can't find anything good to say about Mencius, but somehow picks this one thing out. Anyway, I better wrap it up. So the final point I wanted to make is just a last little speculation is that there are some passages which seem to suggest that Li would have been open to the idea of culture itself evolving as a Darwinian process. If in fact that was true, then that would allow us to distinguish between a cultural evolutionary scenario and some other models of the interaction between culture and genes, such as Steven Pinker's cultural niche theory. So there's some evidence, but not conclusive, to suggest that Li might have supported this line. But well, we can deal with that in the questions if it comes up. I thank everyone very much, and yeah, looking forward to the question section. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Unfortunately, the internet connection was not very ideal in your case, so your speech was interrupted several times. So yeah, you just froze down somehow several times, which was really unfortunately, but it was really good that you also had the PPTs, the PowerPoints on which you have written the main points of your argument. So that was actually very helpful. But all in all, I think that most of the audience has got the main idea of what you were trying to say. And I think that we can have a more concrete discussion on these topics in the following. But as I said, now we have almost 3/4 of an hour for a discussion of these 3 papers. We will discuss all of them together. So questions can be raised or addressed to all 3 presenters. And yeah, I would like now to leave the space to the audience. Questions, comments, critiques? Until now, I don't see anybody raising their hand. So,
if no one else is going to jump in, perhaps I will, if that's okay.
Okay.
I was just have a question for Xiaoming Laoshi.
Yeah.
I was wondering, when you said that Du could be regarded as an adaptation, do you regard that as a genetic adaptation, or are you using that in a more generic sense, the word adaptation there?
Professor
Hu, your microphone is off.
Thank you, Jordan. But to answer your question, I'm afraid, I'm not when I was thinking about, Du as adaptation, as 续度. I have, thought it mainly in ethical terms, not in genetic terms.
Okay. It's just, I found it interesting. I mean, I don't want to seize on that one word, but just after you used it, because in my case, looking at the genealogical story that that Li wants to tell about 自由意志, it's interesting. Like the thing that he finds really interesting in Mencius is this 个体独立人格, the ability to like override one's initial responses such that they cohere with du. And just when you said, like, I regard that as an adaptation for group living in hominins, and ensuring that our behavior is socially acceptable to the group. And yeah, just when you said the word adaptation there, I was wondering whether you would agree that there's that kind of experiential genealogical backstory to our ability to cohere with the du.
That didn't really occur to me, but it's interesting to suggest, you know, that, I mean, to try to think along that those lines.
Sure, I don't mean to hijack the conversation here. Sorry, I was just trying to get some questions going.
Yeah, if I may, I mean, I have commented on your papers already, so I'm not going to interfere with my comments at this point in this discussion, because I would really like to leave some space for other for the listeners, of course. But I would just like to add two things. I mean, it is of course very, very laudable that we are trying to get interdisciplinary approaches to into Zehou's philosophy or into any interpretations in the field of humanities. But this is, I think, it is much more difficult than it seems at the first glimpse, because it requires not only unification of completely different methodologies, empirical on the one hand and theoretical on the other. It also requires a lot of knowledge and a good, a good expertise in the field. For instance, in your case, in the field of biological genetics, because I think that I'm not an expert myself, of course, of these issues, but I think that first of all, that this gene culture correlativity theory has been questioned by many biological or paleontological, for instance, by Stephen Jay Gould, with very solid arguments. It was somehow critically not only questioned, but more or less overthrown. I wouldn't like to say that I disagree with your points. I would just like it to be put into a broader context. For instance, the question of the lactose or the enzymes are also, it is not something which is fixed in our genes, because these enzymes can be set up and developed in a course of one generation, in a few years already. For instance, I have had friends when in China there were no alcohol enzymes, and they came to Slovenia, and we are a very heavily drinking nation. So they, in the beginning, they were very red in their face after one glass, but then after a few years, they could cope with it in a very Slovenian way. So what I wanted to say, it is not actually something that is really transferred very directly by inheritance, by DNA. Because I think that the main problem is that you try to present some findings that only make sense in a very long sense run as findings that apply to a direct genetic transfers. So these developments go over a very long period of time, and they're also, of course, they are reflected in genetics. I completely agree that they are reflected in genetics, but this goes far beyond the boundaries of any concrete historical culture. I would like to make this point clear, because otherwise it is really somehow a little bit dangerous, because it can provide some food for thought, some false food for thought for people who are inclined towards racism. And then I would also like to say that the cultural sedimentation in as I understand this second phase of the sedimentation in Zehou's theory, that it is not meant that the culture is sedimented in all people's brain that are members of this culture. It only means that this sedimentation is given forth to all the members of this culture at a certain time and place. They're not, again, this is not inherited, because otherwise, if we have a Chinese newborn baby in the States or in Europe, who's been raised by European parents, he or she would have much more talent for eating with chopsticks, for instance. And we of course all know that this is not the case. But I think that Roger would also like to say something before you reply then. Roger?
No, please go ahead, and I'll wait my turn.
Okay, so you will. So you think that Jordan should reply first, and then you'll come with your question. Okay, Jordan, please.
Yeah. So I would say, with on here. So this has happened in just since we started domesticating ungulate species, which is where we lost again there, were we? Am I back now?
Yes, now you are back.
Alleles start to be driven to fixity in those populations that have this dairying know-how in the last 50, 60, 70,000 years. But this example is just to demonstrate the dynamic between like culture. It's bringing culture back into biology. So you can part been influenced by the fact that our hominin ancestors have had really rich cultural praxis happening for hundreds of thousands of years. And if we didn't have the genetics that we have today, I don't know if I've lost you again there. So this is just an illustrative example, but what gene culture coevolutionists such as Joseph Henrich will want to press is precisely because cultures are so rich, and because they change people so much across the lifespan of individuals. That is an important thing to be valued. But the fact that they've also been present stably as like parts of the environment, so to speak, for hundreds of thousands of years, this has also had a huge influence in shaping our character and shaping our brains, shaping the genes that shape our brains. So I think this is a way of avoiding the worries that you have, Professor Roschka, about racism and potential kind of genetic determinism and so forth. It's a way of bringing culture in and showing how it has shaped us in precisely the way that Professor Lee emphasizes. We've played an active role in participating in these cultural praxis, and then that has reflected back onto our genetic endowment. And in most cases, it's a common one, but there are also these boundary cases where you have certain alleles being fixed in certain populations that have had certain that's how I would respond to that.
Yeah, okay, it is really a pity because your internet connection seems seems quite weak. Somehow you've been interrupted again repeatedly. But I think that anyway, I mean, I think that we have got all the main idea you were trying to convey. So, and we can then, for the publication of your, I mean, I also agree with most of the things I was able to pick up, right? Instead of this unstable internet connection. And, but I think we can then continue this debate when editing the Sunni ontology.
Sure. I really don't want to hijack.
Yeah. You're frozen again. I think we have to continue this debate in a written form because you're frozen again. Ah, technology. Okay, now you're back. Would you wait?
Yeah, sorry. I just said I didn't mean to hijack the conversation. There was no questions coming, so I thought I'd just throw something out just to get stuff started. Yeah. I don't want to be sitting here lecturing people that are much more senior than me.
Oh, very humble, very humble. But I think Roger has some comment or a question also. So let's lend our ears to his wisdom here now.
I asked this question with some trepidation because Chenyang owns the word harmony. But my understanding, like I have a different understanding of Zehou, what he means by harmony is higher than justice. And let me try to say it. Like when you have Rawls gives us a kind of transcendental conception of justice. This is the criticism of Amartya Sen. That's the language he uses. Like when we look what happens to the justice discourse after Rawls, you move to Walzer, you move to Robert Solomon, A Passion for Justice. You move to a particularly important book is The Grammar of Justice by Elizabeth Wolgast, where it's a Wittgensteinian. She locates, everybody wants to abandon the concept of justice, and they want to talk about fairness. They want to talk about a way of understanding fairness that they learn at the knee of their grandmother. Like Wolgast, in particular, she associates it with Wittgensteinian forms of life, with language games, that kind of stuff. And what in fact what they're doing is they're moving in a Zehou direction. Zehou is saying that whatever justice is, it comes out of historical circumstances. And that's the argument that they're making. And so my reading of what Zehou is trying to say when he's saying harmony is higher than justice would be that justice whatever justice is, it must be holistic. So it must entail both partiality and impartiality. I mean, this is certainly sort of a main sort of precept within the within this cosmology, this Confucian cosmology. And so then harmony is an aesthetic. It's not rule-based. It's not rule-based utilitarianism. It's an aesthetic where what you're doing is you're striving to get an optimizing symbiosis, out of the creative possibilities of any particular historical circumstance. You're trying to get as much as you can out of those circumstances. And harmony, understood in this way, is not sort of the absence of dissonance. Harmony is an achievement. It's a musicality that has tensions, that has that has all of the things that Klein is concerned about. that harmony is not the opposite of dissonance. Harmony is, again, a holistic idea that is maximizing the possibilities of any particular circumstance. And so with Li Zehou, the aesthetic being so important, that's the way that I would understand it. And I look for you to correct me.
Thank you, Roger. Of course, I'm no expert on Li Zehou. I read Yana's book on Li Zehou, and I read quite a bit of Li Zehou's own writing. I kind of agree with you, Roger, on your reading of harmony for Li Zehou. Even though I suspect what you just said also contain a good dose of Roger's harmony there.
Well, yeah.
But by and large, I agree. I think I have a different reading of Li Zehou's justice than yours. I could be wrong. Perhaps I was looking for from what he says that resonates with my impression of his understanding of justice. Because in quite a few places, he kind of indicated justice as social norms, rules that we have to be, go through the procedure to figure out that. And for him, that is a kind of a rudimentary level of social operation in comparison with justice as you describe. And that's my understanding. I think if your interpretation of justice is correct, then it's pretty much coincide. I may be overstating it, coincide with harmony. And that's not my reading of Li Zehou's justice. Yana, is an expert on that. So correct me, Yana, if I'm wrong on reading justice for Li Zehou.
No, but I have here an additional question, actually, since you just pointed it to me, because, okay, your talk is in English. You're talking about justice. And first of all, I think that we should make clear when talking about these issues, whether we are talking about justice in the sense of Gongjiang or about justice in the sense of Zhangyi, because even Li Zehou himself was somehow a bit chaotic also on this issue. That's one of the things I love about him, because sometimes harmony is higher than justice. I think sometimes he translated it by himself as he wrote it in Chinese, like 和谐高于正义, and sometimes 和谐高于公正. So I think that we should maybe clarify first about which connotations we are actually talking here. And then if I just may to, because you said that also that harmony is higher than justice, that it is meant by Li Zehou also on a conceptual level, which also for me connotes somehow a axiological level, but as I understood Li Zehou, because he described it repeatedly in different works, that this harmony is higher than justice simply means that justice, that it is rooted, that it is, that justice is actually must be the basis of harmony. Otherwise, and I think this makes sense, because otherwise, I mean, Hitler and Stalin could have had historically a period of very harmonious relations. So I think that what he wanted to expose, to highlight, to emphasize in this explanation is very important. I don't know what's your view about it.
Okay, on that, I think I think you are right, if I understand you correctly. Li Zehou himself kind of moves back and forth between 正义 and 公正. And he sometimes uses 正义, sometimes uses 公正. I suspect his uses of 公正 may have been influenced by his reading of justice in English language. He is familiar with Rawls' work, John Rawls, and he even read Aaron Klein's work on justice. And that shows that Li Zehou was quite interested in what people in English world are talking about justice. And I'm under the impression that his concept was influenced by people's use of justice in the West. And that, to me, is a good thing, because as you mentioned, we write in English, we have to kind of move back and forth. On the one hand, we need to be careful on what exactly what he means, Li Zehou means. On the other hand, we also say, well, I disagree on this conception of justice. I think this is a better way to conceptualize justice. So there can be differentiation at that level. A good starting point is, as I mentioned, I believe Li Zehou was familiar with the Western discourse of justice, and he wanted to connect his concept of 正义, 公正, with justice. That's why. So there are definitely gray areas on that, which calls us for more investigation, as Roger brought up.
Yeah, there are some gray areas, but I think it is not. It will not be difficult, to clarify these minor issues afterwards. But now I would also maybe like to give the opportunity. We have 10 minutes left for this discussion. Are there any other questions to the first three presenters, or comments?
Can I make a quick comment on Jordan's paper?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this is also based on what you said on his paper. I think the concept of culture here, if we understand it in a very broad sense, then in every human tribe, society, there is a culture as opposed to nature. Then I agree with Li Zehou that our evolution, including our brain, has been influenced by, the influence of culture, sedimentation of culture. But if we use culture in a narrow sense, in a sense my culture is different from your culture, then I think Li Zehou is wrong in thinking that, Chinese culture has made my brain this way, and the Western culture has made Roger's brain that way. And I think that is entirely wrong. So in that regard, I agree with Jana's point. I think it's important that we make a distinction on what level of culture are we talking about. In human history, in a long period, definitely there is a cultural element that plays a role in human evolution, the brain formation, but not in a specific, sense of cultural difference in my culture, Western culture, not in that sense. That's my comment.
Thank you very much, Li Chenyang. I think, do you want to reply, Jordan?
Yeah, sure. Pretty much agree with everything I heard in the broad sense that Professor Li just mentioned. And yeah, that corresponds with what I understand as species sedimentation. And that's the sense in which our brains have been radically shaped by culture in that really broad sense. In the narrow sense, between cultures, I think you still can argue that there have been that culture in the narrow sense has affected the brains of certain human populations in ways that are not evidenced in others, but they are relatively superficial. So mostly what we're talking about is the broad sense in which Professor Lee just mentioned. And if you look at the gene culture coevolution literature, they do actually define culture in a very broad way. They will do that right from the outset. So yeah, I pretty much agree with what I heard there.
But the whole seems to be using that mainly in the sense of narrow sense of culture to show that Chinese culture is different from Western culture. That's my impression. In that regard, I disagree with him. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, we can continue the conversation offline.
Yeah, I think maybe it would be helpful to think about these questions also through the lens of the relation between the universality and particularity. That was what I was now reminded by Li Chenyang. Because you see, to differentiate between the universality as of humanity, for instance, what is really sedimented for us, like, for instance, the ability that we create and use language. This is universal for all members of the humankind, right? But on the other hand, then the languages we have created, if we live very far apart, are very different. And so are the grammatical structures. And these are, of course, we all think in the same way. Our brain is structured in completely the same way, no matter of what color our skin has or how we look like. We have a human brain, but maybe, just like these particularities of the grammatical structures of different languages, there can also be some particularities of the patterns of thought. But we must, I think, we have to approach these questions very, very, very cautiously. And we have to always very explicitly formulate these issues in a way that there will be no chance to be misinterpreted in any kind of latently or manifestly racist discourse, because this is really a very, very dangerous ground. So we must take care of how we formulate, how we expose these questions, I think.
Yeah, Professor Zehou was always very careful to do that. And perhaps in my paper, I should put a very loud warning sign out there saying I'm trying to advocate for some kind of genetic determinism. I can flag that more loudly if you want. But yeah, like culture in the broad sense, like you were just saying about language, there's the fact, like Li Zehou makes a lot of the fact that we manufacture and use tools. And the fact that there's that overlap neuroanatomically of like the motor neurons that govern speech and those that are used for like fine motor control of our hands. I think that precisely like brings out his idea that we created ourselves. We're engaged in all these praxis for many hundreds of thousands of years, and that's how we created ourselves, and that's how we got ourselves speaking to each other as well. So culture in the broad sense there certainly did act back on the brain at the level of species sedimentation. And then at the level of cultural sedimentation, it's dangerous territory. But I think the facts are that there are some superficial differences that you can isolate. But are they is it a deterministic thing? Certainly not. It can easily be overridden in a posteriori sense by the forces of culture themselves. So yeah, I can amend my manuscript just to flag all that a bit more obviously, if people think that's necessary.
We'll be in contact anyway after this conference. Now,
I have a question. I have a question for which I would like Roger, yeah, because you organized the translation of Li Zehou's works, and Yana and others to help me. I have problem, translating Li Zehou's 本体. 本体论 is okay, because this is already it's from translated from ontology. But Li Zehou talks 本体. Let me just read this in Chinese. Li Zehou says, 我所谓的本体论便只是为了强调以人与自然的历史总体形成来作为一切现象，包括我活着这一梯级现象的最后实在。This is an ambiguous, expression, to say the least. And then I jumped. This whole says, what he calls 本体 is 只是每个活生生的人个体的日常生活本身 can be translated. The 本体 is the living, the daily life itself of every living person. Then, how should we substance? I see that Carlos translated 情本体 as emotion as substance. I do not think substance is a suitable translation. Substance stands stand under. So how should we translate Li Zehou's 本体? It talks 本体 so often.
There's a lot of work being done in China by people like Chenyang, people like Zhang Kai. Zhang Kai has written some really good articles, really problematizing that whole ontology discourse. That it really, you're concerned about substance, for example. When we think of Aristotle's substance ontology, he's got a very clear idea of what he means by substance, and that's got nothing to do with the Chinese tradition. And so recently, I created a word, Xiaoming. I created the word zootology, and zootology.
Sorry, I lost it.
Zootology.
You created the word.
A word. Yeah, zoe is the Greek word for life. And so what I would want to do is I would want to contrast the Greek concept of ontology, which isn't really Greek. I mean, the word ontology appears in the 17th century by two German philosophers. They create the word ontology. And so we can create a new word. Like I would translate zootology in Chinese as 香香论. And I think what Li Zehou is talking about is something that is consistent with Xiangxiang Lun. When you look at Zhao Tingyang talks about Jiagan Xiangjiang, that you set the root and then you grow it therefrom. That when you look at I Ching, 天地之大德曰香, 香香之谓义. 香香不异. All of this, the xiangxiang is really the alternative to the classical Greek understanding of on.
Sure, physis.
Yeah,
but
there's a lot of people. The people Zhang Shanglong, Sun Shangchen. A lot of these people are really worried about that same kind of issue, that using ontology, Banti Lun, Sunzai Lun, Dingti Lun, using some version of ontology, it really takes the Chinese discourse off track.
Thank you. Yeah.
Can I ask a question to you, Professor Ames? Wu Xiaoming Lao Shi was just saying just then, am I lost again?
No, you're all right. You're all right.
My bad. Yeah, Wu Xiaoming Lao Shi was just saying just then, 活生生的人的背后的最终实在. This 实在, do you think is it appropriate to have a noun form of this 实在? Is that even an appropriate because otherwise, if we're just translating as ontology 本体论, if we take the 论 off and we're just talking about a 本体, it seems to indicate a noun, but is that even going to be an appropriate way? Is the use of a noun there to translate that word even viable?
What we don't want is we don't want the word reality. What we want, like every time I would see Li Zehou, he would point at me and he would say, one world. Like Li Zehou is unrelentingly non-dualistic. And so the problem with ontology is that dualism just comes marching in with ontology. You have an ontological disparity between essence or substance and attribute or accident, you know. And so the whole dualistic way of thinking is really grounded in ontological thinking. And so a lot of these contemporary Chinese philosophers are really trying to find a different language. You know, everybody's doing it differently, but I think the problem is the same. What we're looking for is what is most basic. If you look at the term tea, bun tea to tea, tea is a rhizome. It's a plant. It's plant life. You know, it's animal life. And so the idea of life really, you know, if I were going to translate Xiang Lun into English, instead of the science of being in itself, which is categorical thinking, I would translate Xiang Lun as the art of living, you know, and there's the aesthetic, you know, and there's the musicality, and there's the civilizing of experience, the aestheticization of experience, the enculturation of experience.
How would you feel about the word zoeton? If we're trying to put it in a noun form, or is it viable to put it in a noun form, or should we just reject that as an option? Can we talk about a zoeton, or is that not appropriate?
I think you can talk about it, but I think it's derivative. I think zoetology is going to be gerundive. That you're not a human being, you're a human becoming. It's not, Tao is not the way. That's on ontological thing. Tao is way making. That the gerund form, that the I Ching gives us a process cosmology. Change is real. And so form within the context of change becomes rhythm. You know, it's the rhythm of change, the cadence of change, not some kind of definition. You know, like when we think of the Greeks, it's all about definition. It's all about setting limits. It's a dictionary form of understanding reality, the world. But this zoetology would be a grammatical way of thinking about it. This is Chenyang's language. But I think we're past our time, aren't we?
Yeah.